Hello, this is Mr. Weber, and today we're going to be talking about the FAFSA, otherwise known as the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So, we're going to be talking a lot about this FAFSA, and financial aid in general really kind of begins at this point in the year. There's a lot of resources that are going to be available for you. For example, we're going to have a couple of virtual FAFSA completion events where we're going to help you finish your FAFSA. Those are going to be both at night from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., Thursday, October 8th, and Thursday, October 15th. I want to mention those right off the bat because I want you to put them in your calendar right now so that way you can make sure you attend virtually. There will be information in your Google Classroom for this. So you will get the links for it in your Google Classroom. What should you bring? That's also in Google Classroom. So go to your Google Classroom. The information and the links are not in there yet, but they will be as we get closer to the date. But the information on what you need to bring, what physical documents, that's going to be income taxes. You're going to need your social security number. If you have a green card, you're going to need that number. All that information is going to be in Google Classroom. You can also make appointments. This will be after October. You can make these FAFSA appointments where either I can help you answer questions, complete FAFSA, or Miss Massini, who is our resident financial aid expert, can help you out as well. Miss Massini is from an organization called ISAC, and their sole purpose is helping students complete the FAFSA and find money to help them pay for college. Use either one of those two links to make an appointment that fits your schedule. So what the FAFSA does, as I mentioned before, it's a free application, and that's a key word right there, free. This isn't going to cost you any money at all, and if anyone tries to charge you money to complete it, you definitely do not want to work with that person. So the free application for federal student aid is simply an application you fill out, you send it to the government, and the government decides if you get money or not, based on how much money your family has to help you pay for college. The big three are these awards right here. And these dollar amounts are a little bit old, but that's because we don't have the updated numbers just yet, but they will be either at these same amounts or a little bit higher. So there's the State of Illinois MAP grant. That's the MAP. When you hear someone talk about MAP, that's an award that an Illinois resident can get and has to be used at a college in Illinois. So you can't take this to Marquette, Notre Dame, University of Iowa. It has to be an Illinois school. So that one's a little bit less than $5,000. The federal Pell Grant can be used anywhere in the United States. That one's above $6,000. And then the FSEOG, that's the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. You don't need to worry about the name. What you need to worry about is it can be up to $4,000 that can help you pay for school. So realistically, the FSEOG, the $4,000, that is the hardest one of these three to get, but some of our students definitely can qualify for it. The Pell Grant and the MAP Grant are a little easier for students to qualify for, but they're based off of income. So not everybody is going to qualify. The only thing is, you don't know if you don't qualify or if you do qualify until you apply. So it's always worth doing the application to figure out if you can get this or not. This would total to just under $15,000. So this could help pay for a lot of your college costs. And remember, these numbers are a little bit old, so it actually probably will be above $15,000 at this point. If you are not going to fill out the FAFSA, you don't have access to any of this money. If you, instead of doing FAFSA, you're going to fill out the RISE application, that's an alternative version of the FAFSA for people who are not qualified to fill out the FAFSA. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. You would only be able to qualify for the MAP grant, that one at the very top. So who is eligible to fill out the FAFSA? Quite a few people are, and here are some of the eligible non-citizens. So with the FAFSA, any U.S. citizen can fill out the FAFSA. These are the people who are not U.S. citizens who are able to fill out FAFSA as well. Pretty common is going to be things like a permanent resident or a green card. If you do have any questions, I always recommend talk to me or talk to your counselor. We'll help you figure it out. If you are not able to fill out the FAFSA, you're going to do something called the RISE Act. It has a big, long name as well, but it's easier just to remember it as Alternative FAFSA or RISE Act application. Any of those will work. I know what you mean. Your counselor will know what you mean. So this just started last year. This is going to be, or at the beginning of this year, really, last school year. This is going to be an application that you will fill out if you are not eligible to fill out FAFSA. So if you are not a U.S. citizen, if you are not one of those eligible non-citizens, transgender students who are unable to complete the selective service, they will fill out the RISE Act instead of the FAFSA. So if you ever have any questions, like I said, just talk to your counselor. This is a completely different application from the FAFSA, so it's not going to be on the same website. Has nothing to do with the federal government at all. In fact, it doesn't even get sent to the federal government. It gets sent to a different organization. A student is only going to use one of these applications. There will never be a time where you use both FAFSA and the RISE Act. You're only going to use one. If you're not sure which one you should fill out, once again, just talk to me or talk to your counselor. So FAFSA, pretty simple to get started, really. It can be a little intimidating before you fill it out, but once you filled it out once, you're going to be thinking, I don't even know why I was worried about that. It was really simple. So FAFSA.gov is where it starts. You're going to click Start Here because you're going to be new to FAFSA. If you do already have your FSA ID, that's what your login is called for FAFSA, you can be a returning user. You're going to say that I am the student because you are, in fact, the student. If your parents are doing this instead of you, they would do I am the parent, which is on the right. But I do strongly recommend you fill out the FAFSA, or at the very least, you're with your parents when you're doing the FAFSA. So which year will you be submitting? And you might think, why does that matter? Well, it matters because there's going to be different FAFSA applications available depending on the year. Which FAFSA will you be submitting? If you're going to graduate in May, very simple. You're going to do the 2021-2022 FAFSA. You're going to be filling out the FAFSA for next school year. So it will be 2021-2022. For those of you who are graduating in December, it gets slightly more complicated for you, and that's because you're going to do two FAFSAs. You're going to do the 2021 and the 21-22 FAFSA. The reason you need to do two FAFSAs is because you're going to be in school next school year, which is fall and spring, which is basically from August until May. But you're also most likely going to be going to college and starting in January, whether that's at a 4-year school or a 2-year school, it doesn't make a difference. If you're going to be starting in January, you're doing part of a different school year. Part of this current school year that we're in, you're actually going to be a college student. So you need to do the 2020 and 2021 FAFSA to cover from January to May. You'll then need to do the 21-22 to cover next August to the even following May. So you're just going to do two FAFSAs if you graduate in December. Please don't let that confuse you. If you need help, send me an email, talk to your counselor and say, hey, I'm graduating in December. I think I need to fill out two FAFSA forms. What do I do? We will help you out. So there's going to be a lot of questions on the FAFSA. A lot of them are going to be about income for you and your parents. You're going to use the tax documents from 2019 for that. But when it comes to the demographic part, which is the first part, there are some questions on there that can be a little tricky. And some of these questions will kind of set you up to have to go back into FAFSA later and fix things. So if we just get it right at the beginning, you'll be much better off. You won't have to make any corrections. It's okay if you need to make a correction. There's nothing wrong with that. There's also nothing wrong with resubmitting your FAFSA. But if we can get it right the first time, it'll just make everyone's life a little bit easier. So answering demographic questions. You always want to look and see, is this asking about the student or is this asking about the parent? The FAFSA will 100% of the time tell you if this question is talking about a student or a parent. Write your social security number and your name exactly as they appear on the social security card. The reason why that's important is because if you go by a nickname, you can't use your nickname. You have to use the name exactly as it says on your social security card. I always recommend when it asks about work study to just say yes. And here's why. So work study is not an obligation. If you say yes, you do not have to actually do it. You can say no later. But if you say no now, you will never be able to opt into that work study for this year. And what work study is, very simply, is getting a job on campus. It's just your ability to work at the college or university you're going to attend next year. And that's great for a lot of reasons. One, because it's nice to have some money. But two, if you're already at your school, especially if you're going to live at home and drive to school every day, if you're already at that school, it's nice to just do your work while you're there. And another added bonus, they know you're a student. So you're going to be able to get less working hours during finals, for example, because they know that you're going to be busy studying. Work study is a great opportunity. Say yes to it on your FAFSA application because you can decide to do it or not later. So males are going to have an extra question on the FAFSA, and that is about selective service. So selective service is also known as the draft. And selective service is a requirement for males. Once they turn 18, you have the option to register by selecting yes on FAFSA, and you must register in order to receive financial aid. So if you do not say yes to this question on your financial aid, meaning for some students, especially if you're 17, it's first going to ask if you are registered, and the odds are you're actually going to answer no to the first question, and then it'll ask, would you like us to register you for selective service? That is the question you're going to want us especially answer yes for. If you have already registered for selective service, you can say yes that way. If not, you're going to ask FAFSA by saying yes to register for you. If you, like I said, if you don't say yes, you will not be able to have access to the financial aid. Some people get nervous about this, and that is okay. I am more than happy to have a conversation. Your counselor can have a conversation with you about it as well. One thing I will say about this is pretty much anyone any male who has filled out FAFSA was required to answer yes to this question. So I had to do this when I was filling out FAFSA for the first time. I can always use an example of Mr. I. Definitely did the same thing when he was filling it out and going to college. So we are more than happy to talk to you about this as well. So when you're filling out the FAFSA, eventually you're going to get to a part where it's going to have you select colleges. There's a couple important things to note on here. You don't have to put any colleges in there to begin with to complete the FAFSA. But if you don't put any colleges in, you're not going to send your FAFSA to anybody. So even if you're not 100% sure where you're going to apply, I usually recommend go ahead and put at least one college in there. Maybe at least put Oakton in there or UIC, for example. Pretty popular colleges that a lot of our students apply to. You search for schools, you check the schools off, and the most important step is you have to click Add. It will not automatically add the schools for you. You have to click it. Once you put schools in there and you're allowed to have up to 10, you're going to go ahead and continue on with your application. Now, these are the schools that are going to receive your FAFSA, and all that means is they're going to be able to look at your information and say, do we need to give even extra help to help you pay for school? Some scholarships are going to require FAFSA as well. The nice thing about FAFSA, you can always come back in and make changes. In this example here, we added DePaul. If you do not want to have DePaul on here, you can take them off. But I will note, once you've sent your FAFSA to a college, they have it. You're not going to take it away from them by selecting remove. And that's actually to your advantage, because if you put 10 colleges in there and you want to put college number 11 that you're applying to, you just submit your FAFSA, and later you're going to go back in, you're going to remove one of those colleges and add whatever extra school you weren't able to put in the last time and resubmit. You won't take it away from a school that you removed, and you will now have sent to more than 10 colleges. As always, if you have any questions about this, I'm more than happy to talk it through with you, because I know that this can be a little complicated and a little confusing at times. Another question here that tends to trip students up are going to be, what is your housing plan? So it wants to know, are you going to live on campus? Are you going to live with your parents? Or are you going to live off campus? And I want to take a moment to talk about each of these three options because they are very specific things. On campus is probably the simplest. It means you're going to live on campus in a dorm. That's actually going to give you the highest financial need. So if you're going back and forth, maybe I'll live at home, maybe I'll live on campus, usually I recommend at the beginning, select on campus because you have the highest need and therefore have a higher chance of getting money. If you change your mind and you actually are going to live at home with your parents later, you can always change it and it'll fix everything else for you after that. So with parent means exactly that. You're going to live with your parents. If you select off campus, this is the confusing one. Off campus means you will live not in a dorm, you will live in your own apartment that you can afford. And that's the key word. They're assuming if you can live in an apartment somewhere, you can afford to live in an apartment somewhere. So off campus actually is going to give you the lowest financial need. And that's simply because they know that if you're living off campus in your own apartment, you can afford to do so. So 99% of the time, students are going to fill out on campus or with parent. So we talked about being an independent or a dependent student. There's a list of questions that you're going to be asked on FAFSA, and it's going to figure out if you are an independent or a dependent student. The majority of our students are going to be dependent students. You're really only an independent student if you are purely supporting yourself on your own. Like I said, there's a list of questions that will help you decide if you're independent or dependent, and we can always help you figure that out, but you'll answer some of those on FAFSA as well. An independent student will not use any parent income. A dependent student will use parent income. So these are those dependency questions. We're not going to go through all of them right now. You can ask me or go through them with your counselor. If you have any reason to think that you would be an independent student, double check with myself, double check with your counselor. There's often a question about who is a parent on the FAFSA. Parents are going to be adoptive, biological, or step. If grandma and grandpa are taking care of you, or an aunt and uncle, a sibling, they are not your parents on FAFSA. As I mentioned before, if your parents are divorced, you're going to use the parent and only use their information that you live with 50% or more of the time of the year. I always like to say that there are 365 days in a year, so it's very hard to get a perfect 50-50 split. So you will most likely live with one parent more than the other. That is the parent whose information you're supposed to use. I do want to note, you're not supposed to just pick whichever parent makes less money. It is supposed to actually be the parent that you are spending 51% of your time with and providing 51% support. If those parents who got divorced, they got remarried, yes, you will use the biological parent and the step parent. I mentioned the IRS data retrieval tool, but here it is again. This just allows the government to put some information in for you. Your parents will need to have an FSA ID in order to do this. One important thing to note, you are going to want to answer these questions exactly as it says on your income taxes. Even if, let's say, you don't live at that address anymore, you're going to want to use the address that was on your tax return. A few extra questions that occasionally come up. Investments. You do not include the house that you live in. You don't include life insurance. You do not include retirement plans. You will not even include a small business if it has less than 100 employees. You would include real estate, rental property, stocks, bonds, things like that. The FAFSA is also going to ask you what is in your cash, checking, and savings, and that is on the day you submit the FAFSA. Few other tips. There's always going to be help and hints. That is always available. Click it, and it will most likely have the answer to the question that you have. But you can always reach out to me or Ms. Massini to get some help. Once again, an FSA ID is required for the student and a parent. This is how you electronically sign the FAFSA. If your parents do not have a social security number and therefore are not able to create an FSA ID, that is okay. They will not need an FSA ID then. Instead of electronically signing, your parents will then sign a physical piece of paper, and that will get mailed into the federal government, where they will then process that as the signature. I want to iterate this point one more time. Please always check if the FAFSA is asking for student or parent information. Every year there's a few students that put their parents' income as their student income, and let's say parents are making $50,000 a year, but that says it as a student. If you, the student, are making $50,000 a year, you probably are going to have no problem at all paying for college, because that's a lot of money for a 16, 17, 18-year-old to be making. If you have any more questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me. There's my email right on the presentation. You can always make an appointment as well with either me or our financial aid expert, Ms. Massini. Either one of us would be very happy to help you complete your FAFSA. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I know there's a lot of questions regarding FAFSA and financial aid, so do not hesitate to reach out with anything else that you need help with. I wish you the best of luck on your FAFSA application. I promise you it is not as bad as you might think it is. It'll all be over soon, and you'll be ready to move on to the next step of your college application process.